What is going on, everybody? My name is Ethan, this is Hardcap Games, and what if the Kalos starters had a Mega Evolution? With Pokemon Legends ZA on the way, and the inevitable return of the Kalos region, it had me thinking, what would a Mega Pokemon for each of the Kalos starters look like? What would they do? What would their stats be? I started to research the origins, etymology, and design philosophy behind the creation of each one of the Kalos starters before going to talk to our buddy Allosaurus about how we could design some Mega Evolutions based on what we find, and I also talked to some of my friends from our days of playing Draft League Pokemon to figure out what we could do to make each one of these Megas as good and useful as possible. I want to thank Allosaurus for coming up with these amazing designs. If you do want to see his creative process behind designing each one of the Pokemon that you are about to see, go check out his channel. He should have posted a video at the same time that this one went live. So if you follow the link that's down in the description to his channel, or specifically the video itself, then you will be able to see how that goes. And I also want to thank Blue and CritCap for their assistance with the competitive balancing. So with that being said, let's just jump right into it and talk about the grass-type starter, Chesnaught. What do we immediately know about Chesnaught? Well, we can garner many things visually. He's a bipedal, furry hedgehog with white fur. He has a domed armor shell with spikes, a green spine on each shoulder pad, and a green breastplate. His arms have some small spines on a green armor coating, and his 3 claws per hand kind of look similar to wooden stakes. When Chesnaught is shiny, he turns into brown and red, reminiscent of the deciduous tree in autumn. Additionally, the Chesnaught influence is represented by its green exterior and brown interior. Now, in my opinion, Chesnaught has the most interesting origin and etymology of all 3 of the starters. Please do pardon my Japanese and French, as I cannot speak either of these languages. I will try my best, but if I feel like I'm getting them desperately wrong, I'll just play a Google Translate of them. Little baby boy Chespin's name is Harimaron in Japanese, which is a combination of the Japanese word for hedgehog, which is Harinezumi, as well as the French word for chestnut, marron. Quilladin carries this forward with the name Hariborg with the hedgehog, and the Japanese word for armor, Bogu, as well as the French word for chestnut, Bog. Again, I do not speak French or Japanese, so I apologize. But finally, Chesnaught's name in Japanese is Brigaron, which comes from Maron again, Baron, which is a ranking of nobility, and Brigandine. All of Chesnaught's Pokédex entries talk about 2 things. 1, that it is capable of flipping a 50-ton truck, and 2, that it can take a defensive stance by covering its face with its hands, enabling it to withstand a bomb explosion. Chesnaughts are typically gentle creatures that tend to avoid conflict, but are fully capable of defeating their foes if they feel threatened. From this, there are 3 routes that we should be investigating. First is this repeated inspiration of the hedgehog. Hedgehogs are known for having sharp quills made of keratin, which is the same thing our fingernails are made of. These quills are very different from porcupine quills, which can be dislodged and used as an offensive and defensive tactic to protect the porcupine. This is something that hedgehogs just don't have the ability to do because their quills are firmly rooted in their skin to the point that you could actually pick up a hedgehog by one of its spines, but please don't do that. It is not very comfortable for the hedgehog. As Chespin evolves into Chesnaught, the inspiration morphs into a strange hedgehog and either armadillo or pangolin fusion, which have very strong plates of armor, which are called scutes in the case of armadillos. All 3 of these creatures are built to be very defensive by nature, so perhaps our friends should be a bit more defensive. Upon researching the Chesnaught, I found not much in the way of incredible defensibility. I looked specifically at the sweet or Spanish chestnut, which is the one that grows on or near the Iberian Peninsula, spreading into France. Unfortunately, the chestnut tree is one that is prone to disease, more specifically chestnut blight, which absolutely decimates the population. The wood of the chestnut is dense and durable and is actually a favorite for woodworking. And the fruit of the chestnut tree, and yes, by dendrological standards, the nuts inside of a chestnut cupule are considered to be the fruit of the tree because that would be the seed, which is technically the fruit. I don't want to get all the way into dendrology. I got a 70 in that class. I am all set. But the chestnut fruit is actually relatively disliked throughout history. Some Greek authors would write about its medicinal properties as a way to cut lacerations to the lip or the esophagus. But past that, roasting chestnuts on open fires has never really been a favorite pastime of the European people. Finally is this piece about the armor. I found Brigandine to be a fascinating aspect of its design. Brigandine is a very popular medieval armor, prominent for the average soldier as well as nobility. It's a bit different than studded leather, though to a very untrained eye, one might have trouble spotting the difference. Brigandine armor is made from segmented metal plates that are riveted to a cloth exterior to hold them in place. The size of these plates can vary, but this was a very popular piece of armor, especially over the solid steel breastplate that we typically consider knights to wear. Crafting a solid steel plate of armor was costly. It could take weeks to be made even, whereas these things were very easy to make, they were cheap, and they saved a lot of resources. A malfunction in Brigandine armor can be fixed in a very timely manner because you can simply replace the one plate that is broken. Brigandine was especially popular amongst the archers because it had a high level of flexibility. It doesn't hinder the attacker at all, and archers actually are able to have a full range of flexibility and motion while wearing this. And this is because all the plates are separate. They are segmented and you put them on individually. You can get shoulder pads, you can get arm plates that are completely separate from your chest plate. It was an incredibly versatile piece of armor for the average citizens, and nobility found it to actually be pretty fashionable and protective, so they would combine the two into one. So, with all that in mind, what did we come up with for Mega Chesnaught? First, we're going to take this idea of Brigandine armor and dive into the metal plating further. We're going to change his type from grass fighting to grass steel. Although this now gives him a 4x weakness to fire, he already had a 4x weakness to flying, which is now a neutral effectiveness. And in fact, by switching to this typing, Chesnaught now only has 2 weaknesses, a bunch of neutrals and resistances, and 1 immunity, as opposed to the 6 weaknesses it used to have. Although the fire type is one of the more common distribution types, since so many Pokemon can just learn Flamethrower for no reason, I think Chesnaught's stats will lend itself to, frankly, not give a hoot about what's coming from it. Looking at his design, his arm plates are able to come together to form a massive spiky shield, and he can tip his head forward and make a solid steel wall to defend his allies. As for his stats, I wanted to make Chesnaught more of a defensive wall with the ability to attack. When a Pokemon Mega evolves, it gets exactly 100 points into its stats, so for Chesnaught these are going to come in the form of 30 attack, 50 defense, 0 special attack, 40 special defense, and negative 20 speed. He's also going to gain the ability Mirror Armor as his primary and only ability upon Mega Evolution. Being that they're both based on knights and suits of armor, it felt kind of fitting to get this ability that has been exclusive to Corviknight up until now. According to my sources, however, most Corviknights tend to just use pressure, so it feels like an ability that can just be given to other Pokemon in time. If we decided that we didn't want this as the ability, Battle Armor is the next one up. I considered Filter and Multiscale for funny points, but Multiscale just doesn't make sense, and by giving Mega Chesnaught Filter, it kind of eliminates any form of niche or use that Mega Aggron has. Chesnaught's biggest downside in this scenario, however, would be the loss of the most recent buff he got, which was gaining access to Body Press, which is a reliable, useful fighting type move that is dependent on your defense. He would lose the stab on this move by changing to Fighting and Steel, however, with this defense stat, I don't think it matters. And once again, if you want to see the entire process behind the design of every single Pokemon you see today, go over to Allo's channel, the link to that is in the description. Next, let's talk about the fox Pokemon, Delphox. Delphox are bipedal foxes with long robes of fur. It has a yellow tail, some red MC Hammer pants with the world's worst fire symbol on them, and it carries a stick from which it casts its fire spells. It has gigantic ears with lots of ear hair. Gross. And the Pokédex says it has the ability to see into the future by gazing into its branch, or use its psychic ability to create 5,000-degree vortexes. Fennekin, or Foko in Japanese, is based on the Fennec fox. The Japanese for kid is ko, and shares characteristics of kitsunes, which we can talk about in a moment. Braixen's name in Japanese is Tyranar, which I definitely just said wrong, but we're going to keep moving forward, which may draw influence from the English word tail and the French word for fox, renard. Delphox likely comes from a handful of places, mostly Delphi, which is the city-state that housed the famous Oracle of the Greeks, the Oracle of Delphi. Its Japanese Mahoxi is likely a combination of the Japanese word for magic, or maho, and the English word foxy. The hidden meaning in here might be that it's also drawn from mahogany, which is a wood deemed to be magical by druids in fantasy, so maybe the staff it's holding is made of mahogany. I began by researching specifically the Fennec fox, which can live in the deserts of Africa and Arabia and have these gigantic ears, and they're so adorable! Mythologically, not much is said about the Fennec fox that we don't find elsewhere in the world. The fox tends to symbolize resilience, adaptation, persistence, resourcefulness, adaptability, ingenuity, and awareness. The Moche people of northern Peru believe the fox was a warrior that used its mind to fight, never physical attack, and in East Asia, the fox is known as a powerful spirit that is mischievous and cunning. In Japan, the idea of the kitsune has been around since 8th century CE in the Nihon Shoki, which is also known as the Chronicles of Japan. In this, the kitsune appear as servants of Inari, who is one of the chief kami in Shintoism and is the protector of rice cultivation. Later, the kitsune evolved simply past the service to Inari, and they became gods in of themselves. The idea of the mischievous fox more likely comes from the Buddhist myth of Yakan, which is a jackal. However, when Buddhism spread to Japan, a land that has notably 0 jackals, the fox became the closest stand-in for the myth. So what did we come up with? Well, I wanted to lean more into this idea of the mysticism, magic, fantasy, and maybe some theology, and I believe the type that best represents this is the fairy type rather than the psychic type. Our idea kind of became a kitsune witch with lots of pinks and purples, but still a heavy emphasis on the fire, and I also wanted to give it an upgrade at the wand position, increasing it to a staff, and here we have it, Mega Delphox. As for its stats, the stat distribution is very specific. First off, what better ability for the Trickster Fox than Prankster? This puts it in a weird niche where it sits comfortably with Whimsicott and Thundurus Incarnate. Up until now, the list of fast Pokemon with Prankster has been pretty barren, with only Whimsicott eclipsing 115, sitting at 116. Most of them tend to either hover around the mid 100s to 110, or they're just much slower. Adding Mega Delphox to this list doesn't make it the de facto Prankstermon, but it certainly throws it into the conversation to be the most used. Giving it plus 20 defense and special defense, these stats are now good enough that they can be invested in and not feel useless. Delphox can now be a bit more defensive. Giving it 11 speed also puts it directly at 115, which is still slower than Whimsicott by a point. This gives Whimsicott a chance to still be useful as a potential 1v1 Prankster showdown mon. It still has the ability to maybe get off a Sunspore and paralyze the Mega Delphox before Delphox has the ability to hit it in return. It now also has a higher special attack than Thundurus, but with the negative effect of being weak to ground. However, Thundurus still tends to just run Defiant anyways, but Thundurus has access to Tailwind and Eerie Impulse as speed control options behind Prankster. Delphox has the ability to do a little bit of everything, but is limited by having to hold the Mega Stone and having to Mega Evolve before using the move. Whereas on the other hand, Whimsicott and Thundurus can hold any item to help the team, like a Mental Herb or a Focus Sash, but a 163 special attack stat is pretty sweet to be able to put immediate pressure on opponents. It still allows you to make a choice for which Prankster user you want to use. The final Pokemon is everyone's favorite ninja frog, Greninja. The largest issue I have with Greninja are that his origins seem very shallow. For the most part, everything about Greninja kind of just screams that they had 2 sources of inspiration and made a pretty cool Pokemon with it. Greninja is, of course, a ninja frog. His head is a weird triangle shape, he's ready to pounce, and his big disgusting tongue is wrapped around his neck. Other than that, there is not much to say about him other than that he has shurikens made out of mucus, not water, that are stuck to his side that he's able to throw. Froakies' name comes from frog and croak, and its Japanese name Karamatsu is the onomatopoeia for a frog croak, Kero Kero. Frogadir's Japanese name is Gekogashira, which is the Japanese word for a croak, gecko, Kogashira, which is the head of an organization, and a Wakagashira, which is a young, low-ranking Yakuza leader. Finally, Greninja, or Gekuga, is from Croak again, Moonlight, Gecko, which is similar to the ninja against the full moon trope that we see a lot, and Koga Ryu, which is the word for ninjutsu. Greninja tends to use swift movements to confuse its enemies while it slices them up with weapons made of compressed water and mucus, most commonly in the form of throwing stars. These throwing stars are sharp enough to split metal, according to the Pokédex, and the long tongue that Greninja keeps wrapped around its neck allows it to sense unseen enemies by feeling air movements. I tried looking first into what type of frog Greninja could be, and I came back relatively empty. The closest things I could find were the blue poison dart frog, which explains why he's blue, and the Malaysian horned frog, which has a semi-similar head shape and those ridges along the eyes. So kind of the frog angle is almost a dead end. I then started to look more into the history of frogs being associated with ninjas, and the only source for this is the tale of the Gallant Jiraiya, which is the same story that these 3 guys from Naruto are from. It tells the story of a ninja who learns the ability to ride and turn into frogs. Jiraiya also learns the magic art of mountain sprites in order to control the weather, frogs, and change his shape and size at will. So then I started looking deeper into the ninjas to figure out what we could further draw from their history. Ninjas use a wide range of weapons that had the ability to kill, paralyze, stun, or incapacitate. Ninjas needed to carry weapons that had a variety of uses so that they weren't weighed down with unnecessary materials. Greninja's design relies very heavily on the idea of using a shuriken, which is stereotypically associated with ninjas. However, there's not a ton of evidence as to how popular the shuriken really was. The only use for a shuriken is to throw at an opponent and go retrieve it. So if you end up missing, all of a sudden you're out of luck. In fact, the most popular weapon for a ninja was the kunai, which could be used as a weapon and a digging tool, the bow for its stealth ability and the ability to take out opponents from a long range, and actually the nunchuck down in Okinawan Kobudo and karate. A katana was never used by a ninja because they were samurai weapons and they would get a commoner killed for having possession of one. And the sai was used to block and trap in hand-to-hand combat. It wasn't really used as an offensive weapon for like stabbing and killing your opponent. One thing that I noticed when I was looking into Greninja more is that Ash's Greninja actually uses a kunai whenever it is using the move Cut, which I thought was an interesting little tidbit. The biggest struggle with creating a Mega Greninja is making it operate differently from Ash Greninja, both in design and in usage. So we wanted to allow Greninja to operate the same way and not completely overhaul what Greninja is, but just make him that much stronger. We opted for the kunai over the shuriken to make it patently different from Ash Greninja. The tongue covers the whole head as a form of physical and identity protection, similar to a mask. This Pokemon would more than likely get banned to Ubers before it even had the chance to hit a field, but I just think he's neat, because he is the definition of min-max stats. Greninja's attack, defense, and special defense are not going to change. However, his special attack is raised by 71 points, raising it up to 174, which now that I'm saying it out loud is insane, but it is 1 point lower than Mega Alakazam. Those other 29 points are entirely going to speed, which is going to raise it to 151, making it officially the fastest Mega, 1 point faster than Mega Alakazam at 150, and tied for the 4th fastest Pokemon in the entirety of Pokemon, tied with Pheromosa. Mega Greninja also gets to keep Protean with the recent change to how it functions, making him switch in and out if he wants to really change. Greninja becomes an absolute beast, but its weak defenses really means that it won't stay on the field too long if you can live one of its hits somehow. So there we have it. That's what I would want to see for the 3 Kalos starter Mega Evolutions. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Head on over to Allo's channel to check out his video on the design process. Let me know in the comments which one of these was your favorite. And with that being said, my name is Ethan, this is Hardcap Games, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.